Hello and welcome to the Outdoorsy Educator podcast. On today's very special episode, we take you beyond the trail markers and into the quiet, complicated spaces between the footsteps. As many of you will know, the Appalachian Trail stretches for more than 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine. For many, it's a physical challenge, but for others, it's a pilgrimage. But what happens internally, in the thoughts, doubts, revelations and transformations that unfold along the way? Today's guest, Savannah Schuring, explores exactly that in her book, Between the Miles. Rather than simply recounting miles walked or mountains climbed, Savannah dives into the psychological and emotional landscapes of Appalachian Trail thru hikers. The motivations that push them forward, the identities they shed, and the meaning they search for somewhere between Springer Mountain and Katahdin. Today, we'll talk about endurance, solitude, reinvention, and what it means to explore ourselves between the miles. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And on this week's episode of the Outdoorsy Educator podcast, we have Savannah Schuring. Savannah, how are you today?
I'm dandy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I came across you through your book, which we will talk plenty about, and then had a little deep dive through your website. We've got a lot of things, a lot of similar interests and things in common. But I'd love for you to, if you wouldn't mind, just to introduce yourself to our audience.
I am an author and educator. I was a teacher for 10 years, and after that, I decided to turn my thesis into a book, which I never thought I would do. And so now I do public speaking across the country I used to teach how to plan long distance hikes, and I still do a little bit, but not as much. But now it's mostly what I learned from my experience on the trails, what I learned from all my interviews of hikers, and how we can apply what I learned to everyday life. So it's universal topics, in my opinion. So I like to go around and talk about that. And then I write these books on all these hikers that I've interviewed.
I love it, and we're going to dive into that because it's something that I'm just naturally drawn to. I've read, many a hiking book, and I've also interviewed many people who've gone on incredible trips and have seen amazing things. But the constant thread throughout all of these things is the people. I spoke to a lady recently who runs the solo female travel network, and they've taken solo women all over the world. I mean, Machu Picchu, the pyramids, you name it. And she even agreed when they survey people that have been on their trips, what was your favorite thing? It was the community, it was the people. And so I know that you obviously have similar feelings on that, and I'm excited to dive into that. I
Mhm.
was reading on your website, you've hiked a couple of trails. You've hiked many trails, but there's a couple I'd like to ask
Just a
you
couple.
about. Just a couple. We've both done the Lone Star Trail, which,
Oh, yes.
yeah, I did that a couple of
Said no
years
one
ago.
ever.
Yeah, it's it's again we talked before when we got on the air about Texas and landscape and scenery. The Lone Star Trail gives it a good effort. I thought it was very good for learning if you are built for this or learning if it's what you want to do. Um, I really enjoyed it. Nothing challenging, but that's not what I was looking for that week. The Teton Crest Trail. That is a bucket list item for me. I'm very lucky, as you are, to have seen lots of amazing scenery, gone lots of amazing places. Jenny Lake is always top of the list for me of just stunningly beautiful places. And I've watched a little bit of your YouTube videos, but I haven't seen any. I don't know if you made any on the Teton Crest Trail, but could you tell me a little bit about that hike?
That was my first big backpacking trip
Okay.
besides my Knowles course. And so it wasn't super long. It was less than a week. That trail's only 40 miles, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But man, yeah, once I did that, because I was a climber before that. And once I did that
Uh,
trail, I was like, maybe we should try this for a while. And not that I didn't want to try to climbing anymore, but it was just different. It was a different challenge. It was a different experience. You're going all day. If you forget your ropes or that's a poor example because you would never do that. But if you forget something pertinent for climbing, it's usually in your car. But for backpacking, it was quite different because if you forget it, you can't really go back. And
Right.
so it's not really, there's not always an easy out. And so it was a little bit more, okay, how self-sufficient can I be? And I'm really out here. There's people all
Right.
around, but I'm out here. And so it was just a different feeling. And yeah, that was one of my favorite. I did it twice because I did it also when I hiked the CDT. I got off trail and went to the Tetons and did it again just because it means so much to me. I cried finishing that trail when I did it the second time. I love, that's my favorite place.
Yeah,
And
it's
so I
it's
highly recommend
beautiful.
it. It is aptly on your bucket list.
Yes, it's been probably 15 years ago when I went to the Tetons,
Yeah.
and there's just something about it. I went to Yellowstone, did all the touristy things,
Mhm.
but the Tetons, I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but it is, I think, the most beautiful place I've ever been to in the world.
Did you hike up to Inspiration Point and
I
look over
didn't have,
Ginny?
I had my
Okay.
daughters were little and things like so it was
Oh yeah,
a different kind of trip at the
sure.
time. But it's always quite nice to leave somewhere with a huge desire to go back, and I want to do that next time.
For sure.
And yeah, that's very much up there. But are you a triple crowner? I believe, are you?
Yes,
Yes, I
we do
thought
say
you
that.
were. Yes, the AT, the granddaddy of all trails, as Bill Bryson said. When did you do that? Has that been a long time ago?
2018. It was a long time
2018.
ago, in my opinion. Yeah, a long time ago.
Oh, you've done a lot since then.
Well, yeah, it just feels like, I was so young comparatively. That was my first big trail. I'd done the Long Trail and Centennial and Lone Star, but those are, you know,
Yeah,
shakedown hikes in comparison. And so
yeah.
I love the Long Trail. It's one of my favorites. But, the AT I was not used to that long of a trip. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I didn't really know what I was doing. I made all the spreadsheets and I knew what I was doing planning and preparation because you can research all day. But being out
Right,
there, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing.
right. But you made it. You did. You had to. You,
Yeah,
yeah,
we did it.
I love it. And that it kind of segues into what I think we'll talk about quite a bit today. I've done bits and pieces of the AT, um, and a year and a half ago I did almost all of the New Jersey section. And I was hiking through and I sat down. It was a really nice view. Sat down to have my lunch, and for absolutely no reason, I almost felt like crying. Like
Mm,
just something, I was taking a week off of work and going solo.
hmm.
And there's something about being on the trail that brings out some emotions in people. And you
Do you think
talked,
for you that was more about just the moment of reaching your limitations, or just the scenery, or just not having to worry about stresses of work, or what do you think that was for you?
I feel it was probably the second two things, because it was not a particularly strenuous part, and I was, halfway through a day in the middle of the week. With reflections, I think about that moment quite a bit, and with reflection, I still don't really know, but I do wonder how much stuff we just all carry bottled up day to day to day, and then suddenly all I was worried about was really nothing. It was just getting to the camp 5 miles away.
Exactly.
That
Back to
was it.
basics.
That's it. There was nothing else I had to worry about that day. And perhaps that allowed me to feel some emotions that just on a day-to-day basis, and I say keep bottled up like that's a really negative thing, but we're just occupied with life.
Yeah.
So there was nothing particularly deep on my mind. I think it was a combination of the beauty and nothing getting in the way of it.
Yeah. I love that. It's a
And
great story.
yeah, that really stuck with me. And I think about that a lot. And that's why I was drawn to your book, because I love reading about the mechanics of hiking. It's interesting to me, but the why and what people learn and discover about themselves, it's just something that I find is fascinating. Where did the idea for your book come from? I know it came through your thesis, but why was this area of humanity almost particularly in? Sorry, the words escape me. You were drawn to it.
It's okay. Words are hard. I get it all the
Yes.
time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was first going to interview long distance runners, so ultra runners, because I
Ah.
used to do a lot of long distance running. And for some reason, I actually started writing my thesis on that, but I just changed at the last minute to through hikers because I had started through hiking a little bit. Like I said, I did those first few trails that were small, but still significant. To me, they were just an easier version of an ultra marathon just because I have a really hard time running the long distances with my knee genetic position. And so
Right.
I just felt since I was doing so well with the long distance hiking and enjoying it, why not check out these hikers and see what that's about? So it was really just picking a topic that interested
Hmm.
me. And I'm a very curious person innately. And so, wow, I get to go ask other people questions and get inside their minds. Let's do it.
I love it. I love it. And you talked in your thesis a little bit about autonomy, but it was self-reflection I thought was really important because it does when you're out on the trail, camping, wherever you might be, and maybe ultra runners and people in other walks of life do this too, but being out on the trail really does give you time for self-reflection, figuring things out with all of those, without all of those distractions.
For sure.
Um, I must ask you because I'll forget. So I've just noticed I've written this down. Snazzy Cat, your trail name. There's always
Mm-hmm.
a fun little story behind a trail name, and I would love to find out the story behind yours.
It was on the CDT, and
Hmm.
people would ask me how I'm doing, and I often said snazzy. And then it was also one person that I was hiking with for a day or two said I was curious like a cat because I was asking so many questions. And then just for fun in town, I would like scratch on at someone's door, like a hotel room door to get their attention. Or if someone made a joke or we were like just reaching the end of our rope, I would hiss, like, and so just a couple mannerisms that I find funny. And so it just became Snazzy Cat.
I love it. And as we talked about before we started recording, I love the television show Friends and do a Friends podcast off on the side. As soon as I saw
Mm-hmm.
Snazzy Cat, I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but there's a famous song called Smelly Cat. And now if I see
Mm.
Snazzy Cat, I sing it's now in the
Okay.
cadence of Smelly Cat from the show.
Okay. Well, I'm
Um,
gonna say that's a good thing, even though I haven't seen that scene. I'm guessing Phoebe sings that.
it's Phoebe, one of her main,
Okay.
yes, with her
Just
guitar.
by the name, I can tell.
Yes, yes,
I've seen
very
like two
much.
episodes of that show. I need to watch that.
Yes. So if I ever see you, if we ever bump into each other on the trail, you'll notice me because I'll start singing Snazzy Cat in the
Okay.
rhythm of Smelly Cat.
Yep. I'll
Let
turn
you
around
know.
and I need to learn that song so I could turn around and start singing it with you.
There you go. I love it. Now, you wrote your thesis, and most people who do a thesis, a dissertation, a big paper like that, they're done with it. They don't want to see it again. But you turned around and turned it into a book, which for an audio podcast, this doesn't do anything, but I have it right here with me. What was the, I feel lots of people have a book in their mind. I'd like to write a book one day. You did it. What was that like for you?
So I sometimes joke to people who have finished a book that they're in the 1% because only 1% of the population has written and finished a book.
Hmm.
So probably the only time I'll be in the 1%. And so, yeah, it was never a goal to write it. I just did the thesis. It was a passion project in grad school, but it was extremely difficult for me. I didn't really know what I was doing. I needed a
Hmm.
lot of guidance. I'd never written a thesis before. And then when I finished grad school, I didn't start the book until 2021. That was when I finished my last 9 to 5 or left my last 9 to 5.
Hmm.
And so I left, I was the director of outdoor recreation at the University of Illinois. That was my last 9 to 5. And so I left that, schlepped all my stuff back to Texas, which is where I'm originally from. And I did the Pacific Northwest Trail to kind of clear my head, which debatable on whether I did that because that was a difficult trail for me.
Right.
Um, and then I just decided to off and on start doing the book, and it was very part time. And the only reason I did is because I felt like I was sitting on a gold mine. Not that what I had written was exquisite, but the information, because no one had done it. It was the first of its kind, and I was extremely proud of it. And it was just sitting there. And so I was like, even if a few people read this, I need to get it out there. And so it just happened. Honestly, I never thought I would be writing a book. I always say like I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. I'm not an author, but now I am. And so I have to change my lexicon. But The process was part-time at first.
Hmm.
I would write a little bit and then I'd go hike, I don't know, the CDT or something. So it wasn't full-time until the last 2.5 years. And yeah, it was a huge learning curve, but I feel a lot more competent now in it. And
Hmm.
if you look, which I won't show you right now, but if you ever looked at the very first draft of the book compared to the final draft, I always say it looks like a fifth grader wrote it. That's how far I came because I went through 33 drafts or iterations, and not everybody does that or needs to do that, but I just felt so much improvement every time. And it was a long, arduous process, but it was very fulfilling. I love doing it. I don't know, I wasn't competent about my writing at first. I'm more
Hmm.
competent now, but I feel like I have so much more to learn. I have the ropes on it now. You're bad at anything when you
Of
first do
course,
it.
yes.
And so imposter syndrome was there. It was real. But now it's like, okay, let's see what else we got because I still have the same research from the Pacific Crest Trail, the Pacific Northwest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. And so, there's a possibility of doing three more, but we'll see how it goes.
And that was going to be my next question. If you kind of have is it, would you have the author bug, or is it more you have this information you just want to get out into the world,
I don't have the author bug, I don't think. I think it's
right?
more I have this good information that's just sitting there on my phone and in my laptop.
Hmm.
And I'm sure there's someone else out there that it's as curious as I am about what hikers are thinking. Because even in the social sciences, we haven't looked at how motivations change or why they change. It's just, why are you doing this hike? Why are you doing this run? Or what brought you here? But we're not looking at what is different about your motivations at the end from the beginning. And so that's what I find fascinating. I also dive, and that's what I was originally just going to talk about. But then it went from motivation and how it evolves, and then I added in adversity and how we overcome it, and also the role and power of community on the trail. And so motivation started as the foreground, and it didn't necessarily move to the background, but I added those two other concepts.
Hmm.
And I also talk about things like confidence and identity, but those are the main three. And so it kind of shaped even my understanding because I thought it would just be all about motivation. But come to find, these other two aspects share a role and they all kind of play off of each other.
I was going to ask you how your perspective shifted because I'd assumed you, like many of these sorts of projects, you go in thinking one thing and it comes out a little different. It's
Yes. Yep.
yes. Now, when I was thinking as I was looking, I've not read your book. I'm trying to be disciplined. Again, we talked about this before we started recording. I'm writing my dissertation and almost at the end. I'm putting. I've got a little pile of books to read. This is at the top
That's
of
a
the
book in
list.
its own right.
Right, exactly. So as soon as I'm done, I get to start reading for pleasure again.
Yes, I completely understand that notion.
You have
Yes.
been there. You've been there
That's what I'm
yourself.
doing now. I can finally read for pleasure. Yes, I get
Right.
it. Yep.
It feels
Yep.
like a foreign concept at the moment, but
I know.
almost there. Um, I was curious though, as I've leafed through the book just to get a flavor of it, of course, and I was curious as to how receptive people were to talking to you. Because when
Oh, yeah.
I've been to trail days, both in Virginia and up in Oregon, I've walked bits of many trails, and people seem very friendly and outgoing. But I was curious how they reacted to you asking questions.
Very well. I don't know. I've said this before. I don't know if it was just me or which I think my ego wants to say it's just me, but my brain knows it's it's probably just the nature of the trail. And it seemed like people were more open, not
Hmm.
everyone, but I think the majority, at least in my experience. And and I came at it uh, quite kindly as much as I could. And if someone seemed like they just were having a day or they just didn't want to talk, I'm pretty receptive to that. And so I usually just tell people one sentence about what I'm researching, and it's non identifiable. If you're interested, let's do it. If not, I completely understand. And so I kind of developed, a short little pitch, and it was usually in town. Sometimes it was on the trail, but I find it was a little easier when people were stationary in town. But yeah, I had military veterans telling me prisoner story, and just I was extremely surprised because I have other veteran friends at home, and I don't really hear stuff like that. I think
Right.
that's reserved for a specific friend or, person that you've experienced a different part of life with. And so I was surprised to get some of those stories. But everyone I felt like was pretty open for the most part. There were some younger hikers that might not have had the verbiage, but they did their best, and I try to have follow-up questions if it wasn't expounded upon. But yeah, for the most part, I think everyone was really receptive. Everyone was really kind. One time I left a note at someone's door at a little motel, and I was like, hey, I can tell by your shoes that you're a hiker. If you are interested in this type of interview, I'm at room this. And he knocked on my door. It was interesting how all that happened. But yeah, they're very receptive. They were very open. They were very warm. They wanted to get their story out. And so I think I
Mhm.
was the conduit and a way for them to have someone else hear their story, because otherwise it's just their own friends. I don't know, whatever they use, social media, blog, whatever. But I asked questions I think might have been circling their head, but maybe I was able to give a name or specify it in a way that they were circling but kind of weren't sure. And so sometimes we don't really understand an experience until we're reflecting upon it. I think you touched on that
Mhm.
earlier, that reflection. And so sometimes people were doing that and they had succinct answers, and sometimes it was me kind of lightly pulling those out with my questions. But either way, yeah, they were very open.
I now have so many thoughts rattling around my head. Like if you'd interviewed people, these same people, 6 months after they'd been on the trail, I wonder if going back into quote unquote the real world would have made them more closed off just naturally. But something about being on the trail allowed them to be open. And you said you were kind of the conduit for getting this story out.
Hmm. I think it would depend on the person, because I've interviewed people post hike before, not 6 months.
Hmm.
I think that's a little long for me, but I do understand what you're saying. And I think if it's someone they know that has through hiked, at least in my experience,
Hmm.
if they know you've through hiked, or they know you from the trail, or something, like they know you have that commonality, I think it's easier for them to open up. But if it was just a journalist or a random interviewer that had never hiked or through hiked, I think that's a different level of openness, at least in my perception.
I would agree with you. There's some commonality, and it's yeah. I think once you've established that, it would be easier to open up, even if it's post trail. Now in your book, I'm not going to ask you for a favorite story. I don't think that'd be fair. But could you choose one that was perhaps the most impactful to you personally? I know there won't be one, so just one
Yeah, I
of
get
one
asked that a
of
lot.
them. Yes,
I have a
I'm
hard
sure.
time with like most or favorite or best, but
Yes. Yeah, there's no yeah.
I'll just say there was there were so many different experiences. There was an 18-year-old that came to the trail and was ready to die by suicide. That really affected me. And he met his trail family, and he decided he not only wanted to live and but complete the entire trail and go back home and live by himself, as opposed to go back home to not a great situation. That one, it makes me emotional just talking about it. But one second.
Yep.
And then there was a gentleman that was 65, and he had waited decades, literally, since he was like 10 or 15, and he was 65, to hike the trail, and how much it meant to him. And he talked about the trail and the soil and talking to the farmers like it was part of him. And I think that just changed my viewpoint on how I think about the trail and how I connect to it. There was another gentleman just a few years younger that was battling cancer, and he was taking chemo while he was hiking, and it was decreasing the amount of testosterone in his body. And
Hmm.
so he knew eventually he would not be able to hike. So he started with the hardest part first in the north. And he did not finish the trail because he didn't he didn't make it.
Right.
But there's there's so many different experiences. The military veterans really got to me because of their stories and how applicable I find it from leaving the military to leaving a trail, that transition period. A lot of hikers call it post-trail depression. I call it post-trail transition because, well, for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's so much to say about that. I only say a couple chapters toward the end of the book about it, but on subsequent books that I have the research on, I talk a lot more about it because I talk to hikers after the trail. But yeah, I find that fascinating, and so applicable. And talking to these hikers, I know I gave you so much more than just one. I cannot do just
Oh no,
one.
I don't. I wouldn't want.
But
Yes, yes,
no, it's
yes.
okay. That's just me. I just can't pick. But so that's just a short reason of why so many different people that I talk to give me so many different perceptions and ways to think about things differently or approach things differently. And so I'm like, well, if this person is coming to the trail like this and they're leaving like this, how am I different from the beginning? Or what stories in my life am I thinking of similarly? Or how has community changed? So it made me reflect more. And so all these people had so many different, some people were just hiking because, and I almost quote, grad school is going to be insane. I want to do some sort of adventure before, it's something as simple
Mm-hmm.
as that.
Yep.
One hiker even told me this sounded cool, and that was it. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But I still learned from something from each hiker, no matter what age or why they decided to hike or their back. So yeah, I think there's a little bit from each hiker.
Yep.
In the middle of the book, I know it's a hiker named Midnight, and he pulls out a poem that he wrote, and he just had a different interpretation of the trail in terms of, he had this different life that his parents chose, and now he can choose his life for himself. So it made me wonder, what does that look like to choose for myself? I've been living on my own since I was 18, but what does that look like to do that? And so
Yeah.
just learning from each person at least one or two things of how does that apply to me or other people. And yeah, it was completely different than I thought it would be, because I thought it was just going to be me asking some questions, writing them down, and writing a paper. But it became so much more of a reflection and an internal process. And yeah, and I also expected physical hardship to dominate the conversations. And it surprised me how often, like you said in the beginning, we talked about connection or the lack of it. And even
Yes.
people who love solitude, and I'm a very independent person.
Right.
And, you know, even the people who started the trail by themselves, which was every single hiker except one, talked about how much the small interactions mattered over time. And in my
Mm-hmm.
study, I know it's a small sample size, but only 3 hikers finished alone. And so, all to say, it reframed endurance for me as something that's deeply social, even when the effort is individual.
Ah, it's beautifully put. I love that. And that's, I was going to ask you, and I think, unless there's something you want to add, you've already really answered it. How has this experience of writing the book and talking to these people changed your life on the trail? If you were going to go out just for a weekend or even a day hiking, I imagine you carry these stories with you in a good way, making you perhaps a little more introspective or thinking. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I just imagine that these must live on through your thoughts. All these experiences that um, you've now heard and then written down. Would
Yeah,
that be fair to say?
especially writing about it,
Hmm.
because you talk to someone, you don't really remember everything they said, at least, especially however many years it's been. But
Hmm.
writing, especially 33 drafts over and over, I
Yes.
remember what they said now. And like I remember multiple times during the interview with the hiker I mentioned earlier who had cancer, he just would turn and say, "Oh, that's a sycamore," or "That's a red-eyed vireo," and just tell me what the birds and the trees were. I'm horrible at naming species. I want to get better, but that fascinated me. And another hiker would just turn and say, "Oh my gosh, look at how the light is reflecting off of that," or "Oh, look at the goldenrod." It's just, it makes you stop, because so many times I've been walking, and I don't know if you've experienced this, and you're just kind of walking past things that other people are like, "Oh my gosh, I've never seen that before." Or maybe you experience this more, in fact, because you do shorter trips. And so
Hmm.
maybe when you get out there, you're more aware. But I found that talking to people and remembering what they said, they and my mother joined me for a couple of times on the hike.
Right.
Usually, just she would hike a mile in, and then I would keep going. And she'd hike a mile out, and then join me at the end of the day just to say hi. But she did a couple, at Harper's Ferry. It's easier trail, but
Hmm.
she was in her 70s, and she did a
Right.
10-mile day with us,
Good for her.
and she kept saying, oh my gosh, look, there's a squirrel. Like, oh my gosh, there's a bird. It's like, okay, we've seen these before. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this flower. And I'm so used to just trying to get out miles, which is, I don't like that mindset for me to be in. But I'm so used to that when people do that, I'm like, oh my God, let's go. But then I stop and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been just blowing past this stuff, and I have to slow down and remember, thank you for reminding me that this is cool. This is why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
It's not about getting however many miles each day. Good God.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and you're making me think of two sort of slight side stories. One is there's a really lovely 3 mile trail, a loop right by my house, a couple of minutes away, and there's a bench halfway round, and I've walked this trail probably literally hundreds of times. It's my go-to if I just need to get out for an hour, and I've never sat on that bench. Why would I? I've got to get back. I'm on my lunch break. And then maybe a couple of months ago, I thought, why don't I just make a point of sitting down for 5 minutes, unplug the audiobook, whatever I'm listening to, and just 5 minutes and watch just the trees waving in the wind and again, sort of making that connection again. It's not about trying to just rush around this 3 miles and get back to answering that email. Take a
How
few
was that
minutes.
experience when you did that? Like, did anything come up, or was it just like, oh, I'm glad I did that?
It was recentering, I would say, and reminding myself how lucky am I that this I live in a pretty urban area, yeah, and this is 5 minutes from my house, and just like a very small reset every day, because and just a reminder why I'm out there. I'm out there to emotionally reset as well as getting some exercise. So now I make a point of sitting for about 5 minutes.
Oh, I love that.
And just it's I think it's just being deliberate. All right, I'm out here. How lucky am I to have the physical capability and the time to be out here? I need to be deliberate with that time and enjoy it.
Yeah, that's the perfect word, deliberate, because
Hmm.
sometimes we can just kind of skate through and we have to be deliberate about, or at least I do,
Hmm.
about my intention, or like you slowing down, sitting on the bench. And so, like,
Yeah.
what's my version of that makes me wonder, what's my version of sitting on the bench?
Right. Could be a
How often do
metaphor.
I just,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. So that's what makes this like the hikers, like, that's what makes me think, what's my 3 mile loop, and what do I just like kind of blow past and just like, okay, yeah, it's my relaxation or exercise time, but what am I blowing past? So what's my 5 minutes on the bench, that I can do?
Yeah. I
So yeah,
love
I love
that.
that.
And it's really interesting when you're talking about all these hikers. It makes me think. I was kind of reflecting in my head about stories I've heard, and I think, like many people, the book Wild it was inspirational, and lots of people love it. And it's a lady who goes on the trail. I wouldn't say she's necessarily escaping trauma, but it's a trauma-filled life
Mm-hmm.
ahead of time. And then one of my other favorite books is written by a man who's I now call it, thankfully, a good friend. Derek Lugo wrote The Fabulous Thru Hiker.
Mm-hmm.
He literally read A Walk in the Woods in his apartment in Brooklyn and said, all right, and flew to Georgia, had never having camped a day in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like two opposite dichotomy to get on the trail and life changing for both.
Well, both of those books had a heck of a recruitment rate, so you picked great books to motivate you.
Yes. Yeah, it's they're both so different and
Mm-hmm.
yet so fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so really enjoyed both of them. As we kind of come around to the home stretch here, I've got three questions I'm going to ask you. The first is, and this is I think particularly important given that you were also in sort of education and now your career is going a different way. But how is success and what you feel of when you hear the word success changed for you over the years?
I think at first it was more, where am I going? What does that look like? Maybe even monetarily, what does
Hmm.
that look like? And maybe something to deal with status or position or what is my job title. And now I think it's more living in alignment with my values and being as much as I can in nature and sitting on my bench for 5 minutes and
Right.
recalibrating. And it's just remembering what, not what calms me, but what kind of centers me.
Hmm.
And that's mostly either hiking or climbing or just some sort of being outdoors. That's community. So it's just, I think, back to values and then
Yeah.
enjoyment and just being curious. And so that curiosity, it always starts with interest and then it leads to, some people call it passion or just some sort of hobby or anything, but it all starts, I think, with interest and curiosity. And so just, I'm glad that I never had that stifled, because I was in education for over 10 years and I saw that stifled so much.
Hmm.
And just sit there and just raise your hand. And I don't want to hear your comments. Just do this. Just open up your brain. Let me fill it with information. Close your brain and regurgitate the stuff. And so that's, some people, I think I can ask too many questions, but I'm glad I never lost that. And so I think part of that is just keeping that, and success is being in alignment with the person that I want to be and what I believe in.
I love that. Yeah. And what a great lesson for us all.
It's a
Um,
work in progress. I'm not saying I'm there.
oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, and you never will be, and that's kind of the beauty of it, I
I
think.
should hope not. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a lifelong journey, that is.
Yeah.
Um, you can answer one of these or both, but I was curious if there is a book and or a piece of music that's been particularly impactful on your life.
I wouldn't say one because, again, I have a hard time choosing one.
Of course.
But I was thinking that maybe in my early 20s, when I was doing ultramarathon running, I read a lot of ultramarathon books because, like Dean Karnazes, I read all of his, and Rich Roll had one. I was really getting into long distance running, but also just starting to get into self development. Like, oh my gosh, you can actually work on yourself? Great.
Right. Wow.
And I have a very specific brain that is very attuned to any kind of self improvement or just like always doing better. I love feedback. I thrive off of just what can I do better. Sometimes to my own chagrin, but and so I think that started it, and that influenced me a lot in my 20s, and in my 30s, it's more psychological books,
Hmm.
and I'm very into psychology, why we do the things we do, as clearly stated by my book and my research. I'm always asking why and what do you think, just anything that's going on in your brain. And so I think now it's more psychology books, not like you would buy
Hmm.
for school, but anything from Carol Dweck to Angela Duckworth. Um, I find those really fascinating. And so, yeah, I'd say they didn't
Yeah.
really influence me in my writing because I
Hmm.
never thought I'd be a writer. But I think I've learned a lot from just how other people think in those scenarios. So from anything from ultra marathon running to now just the brain. So how do we come to the conclusions that we come to? Why are you wearing that shirt? Anything.
No, I
And
love,
so I
yes.
find it fascinating, and it's helped develop my perspective as well as traveling. That's why I'm a big proponent. When I was even teaching, I taught on an Indian reservation in North Dakota for a couple of years, and I would tell my students, even if you come back, just get out for a year, whether it's work, school, whatever. And if you come back, that's fine. But I just think it's really important to experience other areas, other cultures, something. And it really broadens your perspective. I don't think we really understand it until we've done it. And so that's something that's really helped. And it's just the more I'm curious, and then the more I read, the more I learn, and then the more I go do.
I love that. And I think we're cut from a very similar cloth. I've done 3 or 4 5Ks, and that is the extent of my running career. That's it. I've got no innate interest in, say, ultra marathon running. But if there was a book about the cycle, why this man or woman did it, I'm interested. What obstacles did they face? That I'm with you. That to me, that is fascinating. It's less about the activity and more about the why.
Yeah. And then I don't know about you, but I compare it to myself. And that's what I
Hmm.
found interesting about the hikers is yeah, I can ask them all these questions, and it is fascinating to get a generalization of a group of people. And not that every hiker thought the same, but there was often similar answers. And but it's also, how do I think? And
Hmm.
it's shaping us. And so I think if you're like me, you're taking those answers and then it's making you think, like I said earlier, it all comes back to that reflection. It's like, but we need these other people and their answers and their how they live their life, to make us think about ours. Because why are we going to challenge ourselves or think about something different if we're just doing the same thing every day? And so that's why I love talking to different people. And it's like, well, why are you doing this? Oh, well, I wonder how that would look in my life, whether it's food or trips or doing a friend's podcast on the side.
Exactly, and I love that. Exactly, it's come full circle. That's kind of the one of the deep dark secrets of why I started this podcast. I just love listening to people's stories from all different walks of life about things I will never do, I don't know about, and yet they're all relatable when we pull back the layers.
Do you
Um,
think, because like me, I
mhm.
think my teaching career has really helped me be a better public speaker because I'm used to being in the front of the room and some people aren't listening. I'm making jokes to myself, especially when I taught the little kids.
Yep.
I taught all the way to university, but everyone's different. And so, do you have the same thing where your teaching career has kind of helped you want to talk to people more and be in front of people and do this podcast? Do you think those two kind of coalesce in a way? Are the bubbles in the Venn diagram touching, or are they more separate?
You know what? Nobody's ever asked me that before, and I don't know if I've really thought about it, but absolutely. Because I think about the most impactful stories that I've heard in my life, and some of those have come from 8 and 9 year olds that were in my
Yeah.
classroom
Mm-hmm.
who I had no idea were going through what they were going through or came from an environment they came from. And I'm actually doing a talk a week on Saturday, doing a TED talk about resilience. And I'm going to be speaking about one of these kids who, I'm 40 years older than him, and he taught me about resilience. So,
Exactly.
so absolutely, I think it does. I think there is quite a crossover in that Venn diagram.
Yeah, but not many people can say, I learned this from someone 40 years younger. It takes a specific and strong, I think, kind of individual
Hmm.
that you're able to say, I learned this from this younger person, when most people will be like, oh, I know more than you do, because I'm older, I have more experience. But you're
Right.
open enough and confident enough, it seems, to say, I can learn from anyone and I'll prove it with this 9 year old.
And that's it. And that's why when I was asked to do this talk, he was the first person that came to mind was I need to get this story out there. Because if I'm going to be thinking about it however many years later and it still impacts me, this story needs to be shared.
Exactly.
And so I'll be doing that. Um, my final question out of these three for you is if you were going to go on a day hike somewhere you love, and you could go with anybody in the world, whether it's somebody you know, somebody from history, somebody famous, somebody that's been or is in your life, who would you like to go on a hike with and be able to pick their brain?
So I'll keep in theme with my not able to pick one.
Of course, of
You're going to hate
course.
me.
Yes. No, not in the slightest.
So the first, I know people have said this before, but the first would be my dad, because he's not my biological father,
Hmm.
but I called him my dad, he called me daughter, and it was the father figure I always needed, but never got enough time with. And he
Hmm.
recently passed.
Oh,
And
sorry.
so I would love to talk to him. I was just thinking today, man, it'd be nice to call him and just kind of catch up and get his take on things. And so I think, it makes you think about time. But other than that, I, again, hard to pick. I'm sure you have a hard time picking too. But
Yes.
um, do you find yours changing, or do you find it's the same person every time?
You mean for myself or when I'm talking when people for myself, I think it
For
depends
yourself?
where I am in life. Like if
Exactly.
I'm going through a bit of a crisis of some sort, I'm more drawn to my mum who's always given me sage advice and guides me in the right direction. But if life is going particularly well, perhaps my mind and my thoughts are going elsewhere. That
Yeah.
more, yeah,
It's
yes, it does
yeah, it's like
change.
when people ask you your favorite movie or your favorite band. I feel like my favorite music changes more
Yep.
constantly, and then movies
Yep.
is like, well, this year it's. But yeah, anyway, to answer your question, I think I would right now I'm thinking Daniel Kahneman, which is psychologist, won the Nobel Peace Prize in economy or economics because psychology wasn't a thing. But
Yes.
yeah, I think he has so much wisdom from his extremely long life of doing a lot of psychology research. And I would
Yes.
find that fascinating just to talk to him and what have you learned? What have you found? Tell me everything. So I think that's who popped into my head right then.
That's yeah, fascinating. Again, another deep dark secret is I get to scribble all these names down and then
Oh,
look these
yes.
people up. These people that
Oh,
have
yes, you
impacted
should.
other people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
First thing you'll see is probably Thinking Fast and Slow. And yeah,
Right.
I'm sure you'll love that book. That'll be your
Uh,
first pleasure book.
there we go. Well, second after
Second,
yours.
oh yes,
After
of
you.
course, of course. What am I thinking?
And if people want to read your book, they want to ask you a question, find out more about you, what's the best way to get either a copy of your book or in touch with you?
I'm only on Instagram,
Hmm.
and so I'm at hiker_sav, SAV, the beginning of my name. And then the book, it's worldwide on Amazon, yes, or you can buy it through me if you want a signed copy or come to one of my speaking events. Or if you would like to support local bookstores, which I try to get people to steer towards, you can usually just call or go to your local bookstore and have them order it. And then they get a bigger slice as opposed to
Uh,
just going through Amazon. And so it does help support local bookstores, which I know seems a little bit more trouble to go through, but we really do need to save them. And so I'm going to push that.
yes.
And yeah, but anywhere really.
Yeah, I will say on that note, and I'm guilty of this as anyone,
Sure.
I can order a book on Amazon and then I'll be the first one to be sad and complain if the local bookshop shuts down.
I know.
It just takes a
Yes.
little more effort from all of us, and these
Yeah.
places can thrive and stay open.
Yes.
But
Well, we value comfort. And so I get it.
indeed, yeah, we all do it. But Savannah, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I cannot thank you enough for your time.
Oh, yes. It was an honor being here and being able to see your friend's background.
That's right, you got it. Thank you so much. Thank you again to this week's guest, and I hope today's episode was as enjoyable for you as it was for me, and perhaps even inspired your next adventure. If you did enjoy the show, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, or follow us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find more information at theoutdoorseyeducator.com or follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook. Until next time, thank you so much for listening to the Outdoorsy Educator Podcast.